If you're a fan of horror films, then you've probably ranked your top horror icons. You know, the ones we've seen over and over again: Freddy, Jason, Michael, Leatherface. You've probably got a list of your favorites. But there's someone that I bet you'd never put on your list. But maybe you should. For many people, horror and this person do not mix. They live in two different worlds, one sacred, one profane, one filled with hope, one fear. But he keeps showing up in horror. Sometimes explicitly, sometimes symbolically, and sometimes even through his absence. Who am I talking about? Well, you clicked on the thumbnail, so you know. Jesus. Seems like he doesn't belong, right?
Jesus ain't got nothing to do with this place.
But that's simply not true. And once you see him, you'll start noticing him all over horror. Now let me give an important clarification. Jesus is not literally appearing as a horror movie character in these films. Although that might be pretty wild. But if we look at some of the most iconic horror films ever made, Jesus is often present. In the background, in dialogue, in imagery, and in the themes these films explore. He's not only referenced, he's often a main character. Here's what I mean. The Exorcist, written by William Peter Blatty, openly said he wrote it to lead people to faith in the Catholic Church. He believed a confrontation with real evil would force people to consider the reality of God. And the film does this beautifully. The demon attacks the young girl Reagan, but the film makes it clear that his real enemy is Christ. The first act of the demon is desecrating the statue of the Mother Mary at the Catholic Church, mocking her motherhood and the birth of her son, Jesus. And the demon does some pretty horrible things with the crucifix. And nothing, absolutely nothing, cures Reagan. Doctors can't, psychologists can't, science can't. The priests fail too. They lose. But it's in their failure when Jesus shows up in the film. Father Karras finally gives up on trying to fight the demon and instead offers himself as a sacrifice. He says, "Take me instead." And the demon does. And he dies not as a victor, but as a substitute. The point is clear from The Exorcist. That's Jesus' imagery of his own sacrifice, which casts out the demon. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is a similar story, but shares a different, interesting angle. There's a moment where Emily, who's possessed by multiple demons, is lying in bed in the middle of unimaginable suffering. And she hears a voice calling her. It's the voice of Mary, Jesus' mother. Mary apologizes to her for her suffering, but then gives her a choice. She can end it. She can leave the pain, go home, be at peace.
You can come with me in peace, freed of your bodily form, or you can choose to continue this.
And in a powerful moment of sacrifice and Christian hope, Emily chooses to stay. Why? Because she says her suffering will show the world the reality of God and the reality of the devil. That is Christian theology, sitting in the middle of a horror film. And here's why that works so well. Horror is one of the only genres where evil is acknowledged as real. It's not a metaphor. It's not a character flaw. It's not something we work through in therapy. In horror, when things go bad, things go spiritually bad. Scott Derrickson is an openly Christian filmmaker who directed Sinister, Deliver Us from Evil, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, The Black Phone, and others. He believes horror is uniquely capable of asking spiritual and moral questions that other genres avoid.
I always talk about it being the genre of non-denial, which for me makes it interesting in that Christians are not known for open-mindedness. A lot of times we are people who live in denial of certain things, and I like the fact that it's a genre that's about confronting evil, confronting what scares us.
And when evil is undeniable, the film searches for solutions, for answers, for the good and the light. And Jesus is present in countless horror films as that light. Now this is important. That doesn't mean that horror films are Christian films. Let's look at a couple of films where Jesus is present through absence. Saint Maud is a haunting film because Maud believes she's serving Jesus, but everything she does is actually built on a distortion of Jesus. She confuses obsession with devotion, pain with holiness, and her own psychological torment with the voice of God. She talks to Jesus, prays to Jesus, and interprets every sensation as divine guidance, but the Jesus she worships is one she's created in her own imagination. It's a horror story of misrecognition, a character so desperate for meaning and purpose that she twists faith into madness. The terror isn't that Jesus is absent, but that Maud replaces him with a false version of her own making and destroys herself in the name of someone who never asked her to. Another film to note is Hereditary. The whole story of this popular film moves like a distortion of the gospel, with a devoted cult preparing a king to take on flesh. It mirrors the structure of Christ's incarnation, but in reverse. In Christianity, God becomes human to redeem creation. In Hereditary, a demonic power takes on a body to doom creation. These are just a small sample of horror films. There are many others which explore Jesus in different ways. In The Mist, Jesus appears as a twisted, weaponized faith through Mrs. Carmody's fanaticism. In The Witch, Jesus is felt through his absence as the family's faith collapses. In Carrie, a distorted Jesus looms over Carrie through her mother's abuse. In The Lighthouse, Christian symbols clash with the men's moral unraveling. In The Wicker Man, a Christian policeman meets horror when his faith collides with paganism. In The Seventh Seal, a knight grapples with Jesus' silence during plague and death. And in the slasher film Hush, Maddie's cross necklace quietly symbolizes hope and protection. These films keep circling the same territory. Evil is real, active, and costly. And Jesus is often close by. Maybe because he's interesting, maybe because he's popular in America, or maybe because when evil is present and darkness invades, he's the good and he's the light that we need. So is Jesus a horror icon? Maybe not in the way Michael Myers is, maybe not in the way Jason Voorhees is, but he is present in the genre, shaping its questions and sometimes its answers. Here's what I've learned watching horror for years as a Christian. Horror is valuable for faith in many ways because it makes us look at evil. And Jesus gives us something to do with it and tells us how to conquer it. Or better yet, he conquers it himself. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel where we find faith in the fear.